Hello folks, how you doing today? We are going to review Chapter 7, Women and the Criminal Justice System. So this is a very interesting chapter. There's a lot of great history about how women evolved and participated in history along with the criminal justice system. So we're going to talk about that and some current issues that affect women in the criminal justice system. Okay, if you have any questions, please put your questions on the discussion board or make sure you email me. And here we go. What does that statement mean to you? Loud women rarely made history. Think about that for a few minutes or a couple seconds. What does that mean to you? A lot of issues with that statement is that loud women rarely made history because loud women were not allowed. Women being loud, speaking their minds, having opinions, were pretty much not allowed, not used in history. And we'll talk about how that is being changed right now. So women's rights have been fought for a long time, and right now they're just about with parity with men, which is a good thing. So we're going to go into some issues with women's rights, and it evolves into the criminal justice system issues. In early history, women's rights were taken for granted. There was not a lot of women doing much of anything as far as professionalism, jobs, working, research, science, politics, because it was driven by men. Our Constitution was made up by men. Women were not allowed to vote for many years. So there's a lot of issues with taking for granted females in our early history. And it states all men are created equal in our Constitution. It doesn't say anything about women. So that's an interesting concept there. We're all men. Maybe it should be all people. But right now it's still all men. So women did not have rights back then. The 19th Amendment in 1920 gave the women the right to vote, which was a historic landmark case. Kind of a big deal. Hopefully all you female students out there do vote and take advantage of the 19th Amendment. There was a lot of feminist movements that grew after that and are still growing today. Many of these feminist movements were in the 60s and 70s that, again, still hold true today about women wanting equal rights, equal pay, equal everything as men. Briefly, we're going to look at some influential females in the history of U.S. criminal justice. So these are some names that you may have heard, and if you haven't, these are important names for you to remember, to know something about, because they help shape the history of women within law enforcement, courts, and corrections. Mary Weed was the first female prison administrator in United States corrections. So basically, she was the warden at the Walnut Street Jail in 1793. Long time ago, but back in 1793, not a lot of women were participating in the workforce, but she became the first administrator at a United States penitentiary, which was the Walnut Street Jail. Charlotte E. Ray, she was the first African-American woman admitted to the bar. So she was the first, basically, a lawyer or attorney in 1872. Kind of a big deal back in 1872. Moving on to Miss Baldwin. She was the first female police officer. First female police woman, 1908. Not that long ago. Jane Addams, she earned a Nobel Peace Prize in 1931 for her work improving women's social and living conditions. She worked a lot with mentally ill women also because they were kind of forgotten back then. So these are just a few influential females so far. We're going to go over a couple more just so you know that it runs a huge gamut. Penny Harrington, she was the first chief of police in a large city, and that was in Portland in 1985. Sandra Day O'Connor was the first female Associate Justice of the United States Supreme Court. Kind of a big deal that she was. And Dorothea Dix, she was a humanitarian that looked at reform in mental institutions for both males and females. So again, very influential women that have come a long way and forged the way for women within the system. So make sure you read about them, know a little bit about them. As far as women being a distinct culture, they are a culture on their own. They're a distinct gender and they're a distinct sex. The book talks about these things and how the female culture is very distinct from all other cultures. When we look at women that are arrested and being victims, there's trends in female arrestees for what they're being arrested for. There's less biased response now because women are committing the same crimes as men. So it's not just females are, oh, woe is me, let's not arrest them because they're females, they have children. They're now making parity with men, so there's less bias in the response. If a woman is committing a robbery or burglary, law enforcement treat her the same way as they would a male suspect. So the trend is to have less bias response. The changing in law enforcement practices, where again, there's females that are officers and there's females that are also committing crimes. So the female crime is going up slightly. Gender equality, women want that. They want to be equal to men. And economic marginalization, what does that mean? Somebody that's marginalized, not being made whole because of some economic issues. So women should have the same pay as men. They should have the same pay. There should be no disparity when it comes to females in the workforce. Increased community disorganization, again, depending on if the victim's a female or male. There's an increased opportunity for crime to occur on female victims. And there's changes in the criminal underworld. And again, the book does a good job talking about some of these things, so make sure you read these. And there's an increased drug dependency for females that is out there, along with males also. Females are more susceptible to sex offenses than males. Obviously, acquaintance rape are the most common types of rape. It involves an individual that knows somebody else. They know the person. And the other type, marital rape, and that's again the spouse of a rapist. Women in policing, this is a great time to be a female if you want to go into law enforcement because law enforcement agencies all over the United States are actively recruiting females. Civil Rights Act of 1964 outlawed discrimination based on race, color, religion, sex, or national origin. So that was a big open door now, or then, for women to become police officers. Equal Opportunity Act of 1972, again, increased protection of minorities and women in both types of employment, private and public sector. And there are some barriers to females in policing, which we'll talk about. And again, if you're a female in class, what would be a barrier for you? If you're a male in class, what would be a barrier for you to want to work with a female officer? Or does it matter? Because you're all the same. You're trained the same. You do the same things. Is there a difference? So some of these barriers, which we'll talk about in a little bit, there's a graph that you don't need to know too much about, but know that the female officers are going up in police departments, which is good, slowly, not as much as men, about 12% in 2013, so that needs to be updated. So there's some barriers. You can kind of look at these and think about that if you've ever had any interactions with any female police officers. The stereotype is the first thing that comes to mind. They're not as strong enough for police work. They can't do the job physically. There is discrimination in the hiring practice. There's some social isolation that may occur because some males do not think that they can do the job, so they're not going to hang out with them, talk to them, work with them, and kind of shun them. Double standard. Women think they need to do more just to get the same evaluations as males. Sometimes they receive less desirable assignments because of their status as a female. As we know, there's limited opportunities for advancement or promotion, but that's getting better, where you're going to have female officers that are going to be chiefs and captains and higher ranking in the administration. And again, different policies as far as childcare also are some barriers to females that go into policing. So it's a tough job, first off, and then second off, it may be a little tougher because of the female status, which it should not be, but it is. So think about these barriers. So the IAWP, International Association of Women Police, has a lot of things going on. And this organization started in 1915, and it's to support the advancement of women in policing. So it's a very old group. They have a lot of contributions that they do. They do a lot of research. They do a lot of information gathering and dissemination. And 60 different countries, not just the United States, because this is an international group, they have members from over 60 different countries, because there are police women in most other countries also. I didn't say most, there's a lot, but not most. So women in policing is an international issue. Again, they seek to enhance the professionalism, looking at what we can do to help them become parity with men. And again, the bottom line at the bottom here, the last bullet, is free of harassment and discrimination, because that does still occur because of a person being a female. Females in the courts. Sentencing. Is the court more lenient than males? Is that true? Because a female is convicted of a crime, because she has children, because she cries, because she's a female, does she get a lesser sentence than males? A lot of research into this. What do you think? What if it's a female judge? Do females treat female victims or female criminals the same way, different than male judges? Capital punishment, 98% on death row are males, so females are rarely put on death row, very rarely. Female courtroom personnel, if you think about the courtroom, if you've ever been in a courtroom, watch TV, look who makes up the courtroom. Usually it's white males. There is some gaining popularity with female judges, especially in California. Within corrections, I personally worked with many females as a correctional officer in Vacaville. I worked with females as parole agents up and down the state in California. And the state of California does a really good job in hiring. They don't care if you're black, white, orange, green, fat, skinny, Muslim, a Catholic. They hire everybody. And you go to the same training academy. So I didn't find too much discrimination at all, especially against females. They did the same jobs that I did right next to me, and there was no issues. So again, there are some instances where there was, but I never saw that, which is a good thing. So females in corrections, they are wardens, they are administrators, they are officers, they're parole agents, they do everything. So again, usually the state does a good job about having less discrimination. So as far as females incarcerated, very few compared to males. We only have 2 prisons in California that house females now. We used to have 3. There's limited opportunities in jail and prison for females because the level is so low. So they do not have as much rehabilitation possibility as males in jails or prisons. Longer sentences, specialized treatment is needed for females that are in prison. There are females out there that are doing life without parole, and there are a lot of programs that are set up for them, but not as many as males. And we just talked about females working in corrections, well received. Inmates don't seem to have a problem with it. Not that I saw. Sometimes females have to be a little bit tougher in the beginning to establish themselves, and then they're treated just like all the other correctional officers. Okay, some reasons for the presence within the criminal justice system. So this is why more females are going into the criminal justice system to work. And again, there's a lot of issues here, and you can kind of read these, kind of choose which one you want to think about or talk about. The war on drugs is one because national, state, and local agencies are hiring to fight the war on drugs, whether it's law enforcement or interdiction or data collection. Increased drug use and addiction among women. There's a lot of women that go into corrections or law enforcement as counselors. So overall, there's different types of programs out there that attract females into the system. Okay. Of course, there are other females that are committing crimes that are also within the system. Some negative issues upon children of incarcerated parents, and a lot of research has shown that when females go into custody, they do have children, but when females are released from custody, they generally do better on the outside and don't recidivate. They don't commit crimes again as much as males, and it's normally because of their children. They do not want to be separated from their children. So there's a lot of issues with parents of incarcerated children. And again, there are in the Midwest a couple jails where if a female is pregnant, she can actually have the child in the jail, and the child can live with them in the jail in a jail nursery for a certain number of months. So again, they're getting very lax sometimes on this, which may be good for the child. Not sure about the person that gave birth that's still in custody. Again, if they're getting treatment or some sort of skill training, that might be a better thing. So visitation programs are out there. In California, our prisons are kind of isolated, so people have to drive to get there, maybe 2 or 3 hours, so visitation is not as good as it should be. There's support groups out there. There's a lot of intervention that goes on because it can be devastating for a child whose parent is in custody, especially if it's a mother. So here's some questions for review for this chapter. So you might want to write these down, answer these questions, take a few minutes. You don't need to turn these answers in, but you may want to keep them for an upcoming exam or possibly pop quiz. So again, answer these questions, okay, just briefly, and keep them in your notes. You don't need to turn them in. Think about them, and we may have another discussion on these questions. And that does it for this chapter. So again, if you have any issues, questions, comments, please put them in the discussion board. And if not, we will talk to you again soon. Thank you and have a good day.